Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a retired Army engineer returns home to find his handcrafted bridge demolished by a rogue HOA, he doesn't get mad, he gets tactical. What starts as property damage turns into an all-out war for justice, water rights, and revenge in the wilds of Montana. This time, the veteran fights back. When I pulled into my driveway that afternoon, the sky was just starting to shift into that dusty Montana gold. I had 2 bags of fencing hardware in the truck bed, a thermos of lukewarm coffee, and a head full of mild irritation after spending the better part of the morning arguing with a teenager at the Bozeman Co-op about the difference between galvanized and stainless bolts. I remember thinking I'd finally get some peace back at home. I was wrong. I caught sight of the lake as I rounded the hill past the alfalfa field. My house sits tucked into a curve of the shoreline, a tight, shallow inlet that's been mine for 12 years. My dock, the boathouse, and more importantly, the narrow footbridge I built with my own hands back in 2016 all came into view, or rather, what was left of the bridge did. At first, I thought maybe a tree had fallen. The central span was missing. 2 of the main beams split like cracked ribs. The support columns were jagged at the top, as if someone had taken a saw to them and quit halfway through. A pile of wet lumber and twisted steel bolts floated nearby, and a few planks bobbed on the current like driftwood. I pulled the truck to a hard stop, jumped out, and jogged down the slope, boots crunching across the gravel path. It wasn't weather. It wasn't rot. This was no accident. This was deliberate. There were neon orange plastic ribbons tied haphazardly to 2 makeshift stakes driven into the bank. Hanging from one of them was a laminated sign that read, "Notice. Unauthorized structure removed under Section 4.8, Silver Hollow HOA Visual Impact Compliance." Below it, in smaller print, "Restoration efforts coordinated by the HOA Board for Community Aesthetic Standards." I stared at it for a good 10 seconds, reading it twice, letting my brain try to process the utter stupidity of what I was seeing. I don't live in Silver Hollow, never have. My land was subdivided decades before that over-manicured wannabe golf resort community even existed. I'm not under their jurisdiction, their bylaws, their fake titles, or their smug little monthly newsletter. The only thing I shared with them was a body of water, and now they'd waded into mine. I stood at the edge of the broken bridge, fists clenched, the wind tugging at my jacket. The bridge had connected the cabin side of my property to the far bank, where I grew alfalfa for a neighboring cattle rancher. Without it, the tractor route was cut off. I'd have to drive around the entire lake and down through a rocky access road that was damn near impassable after rain. And that wasn't even the worst of it. This was my structure, built legally, inspected, registered with the county. I had the permits in a folder thicker than Karen's ego. I turned on my heel and marched back to the truck, grabbed my phone, called the sheriff's office first, figured it was criminal damage. The dispatcher was polite but non-committal. "Sounds like a civil matter," she said. "Maybe talk to the HOA board first." That's when I knew I'd be getting no cavalry this time. Back at the house, I pulled the folder from my safe. Permit 726 LM 2016. Signed off by the county engineer. Photos. Surveyor maps. Even a thank you letter from the guy who'd inspected the footings and said it was the cleanest job he'd seen outside of government contracting. I didn't just build that bridge. I designed it. I maintained it. I'd walked across it every morning for 6 years, and now some HOA flunkies had taken it apart like it was a playground jungle gym they didn't like the look of. By sunset, I'd already typed up a formal incident report and emailed it to the County Infrastructure Office, the Water Rights Bureau, and every HOA board email I could find on their website. Their site, by the way, was password protected. You had to be a resident in good standing to access the member portal. I used an archived version from the Wayback Machine just to dig up their contact info. Bureaucracy at its finest. Before bed, I walked back out to the lake. The bridge was now just a memory, the far shore already cloaked in darkness. Somewhere across that lagoon sat 12 luxury lakefront homes, each with their own little boat docks, infinity edge hot tubs, and smug sense of superiority. And somewhere among them, I imagine, sat the one person responsible for this. A woman with a clipboard, an agenda, and a pathological need to control everything within eyeshot. I hadn't seen her in person yet, but I already knew her name, Karen. The next morning, I was already on the road by 7, heading toward the county administrative building. I hadn't slept much. You don't just erase a bridge from a man's land and expect him to roll over. I may be retired, but I didn't spend 22 years in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to let a glorified neighborhood committee tear apart my infrastructure with zip ties and wishful thinking. The Office of Land and Water Resources was in a squat tan building that looked like it had been designed by someone who hated windows. Inside, I handed over my documents and waited. After 20 minutes, a clerk named Brandon, friendly enough, mid-30s, with an overgrown mustache and a pen behind each ear, came out with a tight expression. "Mr. Dalton," he said, flipping through my folder, "I can tell you right now, we didn't issue any directive for demolition. This permit is still active, and I see no record of violation." I felt my jaw tighten. So, if someone came to you saying my bridge was a problem, they'd be told to file a formal complaint and wait for an inspection, which takes weeks minimum. We don't send anyone out to tear down structures without notice. That's illegal. I nodded slowly. What if I told you someone presented a document claiming authorization from your office? Brandon frowned. Do you have it? I didn't, but I knew who might. On my way out, I stopped at the front desk and filed a records request for any communication between Silver Hollow HOA and County Infrastructure Services from the last 6 months. That would take a few days, but I had other irons in the fire. Back home, I climbed up to my roof, where I kept a backup signal booster, and accessed the cloud storage from the security cameras I'd installed years ago. Most of the cameras had been taken down, literally sliced from their mounts, but they were wireless. And unlike most HOA board members, I actually know how to configure backups. One camera tucked under the eaves of my boathouse had survived the purge. I clicked through the archive until I hit pay dirt. 2:34 a.m., 2 nights before. A white utility van pulled up on the service road. No logos, no markings, just a plain vehicle and 5 figures in dark clothing. They wore hooded jackets, no reflective vests. Not one of them was dressed like a licensed contractor. They moved fast, too fast for anyone doing legitimate work. They brought bolt cutters, cordless saws, and crowbars. They didn't even set up lighting, just headlamps and brute force. By 3:15 a.m., the bridge was already half gone. I paused the video at one frame, a side profile. One of the men turned his head toward the camera for a moment. The image was grainy, but familiar. Tall, skinny, angular build, baseball cap pulled low. I'd seen that kid before, maybe once or twice at HOA functions I was dragged to by a friend who lives just outside the border. Karen's son, if I remembered correctly. Dylan, or Devin, or some other name that screams, "My mom will sue you." I made backup copies of the footage on 3 separate drives and printed out stills for good measure. Then I called the sheriff's office again and asked to file a formal criminal complaint. This time, I wasn't taking civil matter for an answer. The deputy who showed up was a woman in her 40s named Linda Carver. Professional, straight-faced, the kind who doesn't mind getting her boots muddy. She watched the video, nodded occasionally, and asked the right questions. "Can you confirm this bridge is on your parcel?" "Yes, I've got the survey to prove it. The water line at that spot is also within my property boundary, about 10 feet in. And you're not part of the Silver Hollow HOA? "Not now, not ever." "Then yeah," she said, "this is definitely unlawful entry and destruction of private property. You'll need to file with the county prosecutor, but I'll start the case report." I handed her a folder with all the documentation, permits, maps, timestamps, still images. She flipped through it with a small grunt of appreciation. "You're more prepared than half the lawyers I know." That afternoon, I sat in my home office writing the first of what I knew would be many formal complaints. I emailed a notarized affidavit to the prosecutor's office, then CC'd it to every HOA board member listed online, just to make sure they knew the storm was coming. I didn't get a response. But the next morning, a white envelope showed up in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a 1-page printed statement from Silver Hollow HOA, signed in thick black ink by Karen Lance herself. The structure in question constituted a visual disruption to the shared lakescape and was removed in accordance with Article 5, Section 8 of the Silver Hollow Aesthetic Preservation Plan. The kicker: we regret that you were not informed in advance, but the urgency of preserving shoreline harmony required immediate action. No mention of jurisdiction, no legal citation, just shoreline harmony. As if this were a Buddhist monastery instead of Western Montana. I stared at the letter for a full minute, then laughed out loud, a sharp, humorless sound that echoed across the empty inlet. She really thought she could get away with it. And maybe she would have, if I were anyone else. But Karen had picked the wrong man. I'd built hydroelectric systems in Afghanistan under mortar fire. I wasn't about to let a suburban tyrant and her HOA cult bulldoze my land without consequences. 3 days later, I got an email from someone named Greg Mortimer, vice president of the Silver Hollow HOA board. He invited me to what he called a collaborative resolution meeting at their community center. The email was overly polite, full of bureaucratic soft language and passive-aggressive buzzwords like stakeholder concerns, landscape coherence, and respectful dialogue. I didn't reply. Instead, I showed up with my lawyer, Denise Shaver, who'd been my go-to legal bulldog since a botched boundary dispute back in 2019. Denise didn't smile much, but she could quote Montana property law faster than most judges could look it up. She wore a black suit, carried a leather binder the size of a microwave, and walked into the Silver Hollow clubhouse like she owned the place. The meeting room was one of those over-air-conditioned conference spaces with fake plants, bad art, and a lingering scent of lemon-scented surface cleaner. Waiting for us was the full board, 7 people, all dressed like they were auditioning for a retirement commercial. At the center of the table sat Karen Lance. She wore a beige power suit, hair in a tight bun, and a smile that made you want to check your wallet. I'd never spoken to her in person before. I already hated every syllable that came out of her mouth. "Mr. Dalton," she said, motioning for me to sit. "We appreciate your willingness to come discuss this unfortunate misunderstanding." "It's not a misunderstanding," I said. "You sent people onto my land and demolished a legal structure without consent or jurisdiction." Karen's smile didn't even twitch. "We acted in accordance with our aesthetic impact assessments. The bridge was not in harmony with the natural beauty of the lake." I leaned forward. "You mean it didn't fit your idea of what lakefront living should look like from your side of the water?" Denise opened her binder and slid a copy of the county permit across the table. "This bridge was constructed in 2016 with full authorization. Your client committed trespass and destruction of private property." Karen didn't even glance at the document. "The HOA has a responsibility to all residents. Our community standards are very clear about maintaining visual unity across shared resources." "That's interesting," Denise said, voice like a scalpel, "because Mr. Dalton isn't part of your community. He owns a separate parcel predating the formation of Silver Hollow HOA and was never subjected to your covenants. You don't have the authority to dictate anything on his land." One of the board members, some sunburned man in golf clothes, cleared his throat. "The lake is a shared body of water. That gives us certain easement rights." "Not when you cross a property line and start swinging demolition tools in the middle of the night," I snapped. Karen finally dropped the pretense. "Look, Mr. Dalton, your bridge was an eyesore. We've had multiple complaints from lakefront residents. You don't contribute to the HOA. You don't attend meetings. Frankly, you've been treating this place like your personal bunker. And yet," I said, "you had no issue letting me manage the drainage system all these years." The room went quiet for a beat. Her expression cracked ever so slightly. She knew I had her. I stood. "This isn't a negotiation. You violated state law. You came onto my land with hired thugs and destroyed a structure I legally own. You think a few buzzwords about shoreline harmony are going to erase that?" Denise rose beside me, gathering her documents. "Expect a criminal subpoena within the week, Ms. Lance, and a civil suit shortly thereafter." Karen stood, eyes hard. "You think you're the only one who knows people in this town? We have lawyers, too." "Great," Denise said with a grin so cold it could have flash frozen the lake. "We'll see them in court." We walked out of the building without another word. Outside, I paused by the front fountain, one of those ridiculous tiered things with LED lights. HOA money at work. I took a slow breath and watched the sprinkler arc into the air like a geyser of stupidity. That evening, I got a voicemail from a local journalist I knew in passing. He'd gotten wind of some conflict between a retired engineer and a lakefront HOA. I told him to give me a few days. There was a storm brewing, but I wanted it aimed in the right direction. I sat down at my kitchen table that night, opened my old field sketchbooks, and reviewed a diagram I hadn't looked at in years. On page 12 was a hand-drawn schematic of the sluice gate system I'd built back in 2011, the one that controlled flow out of the eastern end of the lake. I'd built it. I owned the land it sat on. I maintained it. And now, I had absolutely no reason to keep that water stable. The next morning, I drove out to the eastern edge of my property, where the forest thins and the land dips into a natural basin. Tucked behind a cluster of cottonwoods surrounded by a chain-link fence and overgrown blackberry vines sat the sluice gate station, my old friend. It hadn't changed much since I built it back in 2011. Manual crank, reinforced concrete housing, rust-resistant valves. I'd even engraved a little U.S. Army Corps insignia on the inside of the gate just for pride's sake. I unlocked the gate, stepped into the shed, and ran a full inspection. Everything was in working order. The pressure gauges were steady, the drainage channel free of debris, and the spillway dry. It was quiet in there, except for the soft whine of insects and the occasional creak of metal expanding under the morning sun. I pulled out the maintenance log and jotted down a note. Service temporarily suspended pending legal review. Then I printed a laminated notice, fixed it to the interior wall, and took photographs of every step. If the HOA wanted to argue that I'd sabotaged something, I wanted a paper trail a mile long. Back at the cabin, I sent copies of the inspection log, the photographs, and a written notice to the County Infrastructure Department, the Montana Department of Natural Resources, and the HOA Board, just to make sure they understood I wasn't hiding anything. I made it crystal clear. As per my rights outlined in the original easement agreement of 2011, I was suspending all voluntary maintenance of the sluice gate system until the legal dispute with Silver Hollow was resolved. Within 24 hours, I received 2 responses. First came a polite but vague reply from the county. Your notice has been received. Please advise if you experience any immediate safety concerns. Translation: we're not getting involved unless someone dies. The second email was from Karen. No greeting, no pleasantries. You are now willfully endangering shared community property. Your refusal to maintain the water level places Silver Hollow's ecosystem and residents at risk. This constitutes a violation of public duty. I read it twice, then hit reply. The only violation I see is a criminal one, committed by your board. My maintenance was always a courtesy, not an obligation. That courtesy has ended. Then I added, P.S. You should read your own community charter before throwing around words like public duty. I figured that would keep them stewing for a while. What I didn't expect was what came next. 2 days later, I noticed a strange vehicle parked just beyond the tree line near the sluice access road. White SUV, tinted windows, stayed there for over an hour, engine off. I hiked down through the brush to get a better view, using the scope from my old spotting rifle. Inside sat a man in a suit, typing on a laptop. Didn't look like a surveyor, didn't look like anyone from the county. I took pictures, called Denise. That smells like a private investigator, she said. Probably hired by the HOA to dig dirt or prove you're being negligent. Let them dig, I said. All they're going to find is 20 years of engineering excellence and a spotless service record. The next morning, I installed a motion sensor trail cam facing the road, just in case they got brave. I also upgraded the locks on the control shed and dropped by the sheriff's office to file a formal notice of suspected surveillance and harassment. Then I started getting phone calls. First, it was just a local real estate agent asking if I'd consider selling now that the area's transitioning toward high-value development. Then it was a landscaping contractor I didn't know, offering free shoreline restoration consultation. 1. Even claimed to be from a documentary crew filming a segment on legacy landowners resisting community progress. All of them were fishing. All of them got the same answer. Hell no. They were probing, testing my nerves, seeing if I'd blink. But I wasn't just some recluse with a shotgun and a grudge. I was a licensed engineer with documentation, expertise, and the full weight of the law behind me. And I had something else they'd clearly forgotten. Control of the one thing they all took for granted, the water. The rain came earlier than usual that year. Heavy sheets rolled in from the north, thick and dark, soaking the ridgeline and hammering down on the alfalfa fields. My gutters overflowed in under an hour. Out by the lake, the inlet swelled with runoff, creeping higher by the hour. I stood at my kitchen window, sipping black coffee and watching the sky boil. The sluice gate was holding, for now. But without active control, the system had reverted to passive drainage, which meant when the lake rose above a certain threshold, the emergency bypass would engage. It was designed to prevent flooding. What it wasn't designed for was aesthetic preservation. 3 days into the storm, I got a call from a neighbor across the lake. Not a friend, but one of those quiet types who keeps to himself and stays out of HOA politics. He said, "You might want to take a look at the lagoon. Something weird's going on." So I did. I drove out past the gate, hiked down the maintenance trail, and stared down at the eastern spillway. Water was flowing, not fast, but steady. The lake had reached its overflow point, and thanks to years of sediment buildup on their side, most of that outflow was being pulled from the deeper channel that fed the Silver Hollow Lagoon. I followed the runoff all the way down the natural drainage path, a seasonal stream that curved through public land and fed into a lower basin about half a mile out. By the time I reached it, the sound was unmistakable. Fast, gurgling current. The sluice was draining. The system was working exactly as I built it to work, but on the other side of the lake. That was a different story. From my bluff, I could see their docks, no longer floating, but resting unevenly on mud. The spa deck was now hovering above what looked like a shallow puddle. Kayaks and paddleboards lay abandoned in the muck. The waterline had receded almost 10 feet. And the best part, all of it was perfectly visible from their Instagram-ready clubhouse patio. By the end of the week, the HOA had held an emergency meeting. Denise sent me a copy of the agenda. Top item, urgent water level decline, emergency remediation plan. The language was panicked, bureaucratic, and beautifully impotent. They had no authority over the sluice, no legal grounds to force me to act, and when they called the county to complain, they were told in polite government speak, "Mr. Dalton is within his rights to suspend maintenance during pending litigation." That was when the real noise started. Local news ran a segment, "Luxury Lakefront drains after bridge dispute. Who's to blame?" They played aerial footage of the exposed mudflats, the leaning boathouses, the stranded rental villas. One anchor described it as an environmental crisis with millions in damages, while the reporter on the ground noted helpfully that the property owner at the center has a background in military infrastructure engineering. The HOA tried to spin it. Karen gave a painfully stiff interview blaming malicious neglect and a retaliatory act by a disgruntled landowner. But by then, the media had already picked up the real story. One outlet ran the headline, "HOA destroys Veterans Bridge, ends up sinking their own investments." The next day, I got a cease and desist letter from a big-name law firm out of Missoula. It accused me of intentional hydrological sabotage and demanded immediate reinstatement of all flow control operations. Denise read it, snorted, and said, "This thing is weaker than a paper fence in a windstorm." She drafted a counter letter citing my easement rights, the terms of my maintenance agreement, the suspension clause, and about a dozen other legal grenades. We mailed it to every name on their board, every property owner on the Silver Hollow tax list, and the local news station just for fun. That same night, someone tried to cut the lock on the sluice gate shed. I knew because I'd set up an infrared trip sensor 2 days earlier. The alert pinged at 2:15 a.m., and I arrived with a flashlight and a 12-gauge slung across my back. Whoever it was had already taken off, but not before leaving scuff marks on the door and a discarded set of bolt cutters in the weeds. I called the sheriff again. Linda came out, took photos, collected the tool, and said, "Looks like they're starting to panic." "They picked the wrong veteran to screw with," I muttered. She gave me a rare half-smile. "Yeah, I'm starting to see that." By the end of the second week, the Silver Hollow Lagoon looked like a cheap resort after a biblical drought. The water was mostly gone, just a shallow pool clinging to the center surrounded by mud, algae, and broken dreams. The high-end spa complex sat marooned on dry land, its infinity edge now ending in a sharp drop to cracked clay. 2 docks had collapsed under their own weight. One boat was stuck at a crooked angle, half submerged in what looked like motor oil and pond scum. I got an invitation to a town hall meeting organized by the HOA. The title, Community Emergency, Unified Action Against Infrastructure Sabotage. I laughed so hard I spilled coffee on the letter. Meanwhile, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, lawyers, even realtors. One guy offered me $2.8 million for my land. Another said he represented interested parties with development visions. I told him my vision involved a new barn, a whiskey barrel smoker, and the permanent humiliation of every fool on that HOA board. He didn't call back. Denise and I had our hands full. The civil suit was moving forward. Destruction of private property, trespass, unauthorized demolition, plus damages. But that wasn't even the fun part. The real meat was the criminal complaint. Thanks to the video footage and camera timestamps, we had strong evidence that the HOA had hired an unlicensed crew to enter my land and destroy a structure in the dead of night. That put us into felony territory. That's when things got dirty. Karen filed a countersuit accusing me of intentional flooding, claiming I had manipulated the sluice system to deliberately damage Silver Hollow. Never mind the fact that the system had defaulted to its passive overflow mode, something I documented thoroughly. Her lawyer submitted an affidavit alleging mechanical tampering. Problem was, they didn't realize I'd already handed over full inspection logs to the county. And even worse, for them, the county responded publicly. In an official statement, the County Infrastructure Department confirmed that 1. The sluice system had not been altered. 2. The drainage occurred naturally through designed channels. 3. The only disruption had been the HOA's unauthorized demolition, which may have affected shoreline integrity. They basically threw Karen under the bus in bold letters. Karen naturally doubled down. At a press conference held at the Silver Hollow Clubhouse, she stood in front of a dozen residents and declared, "We will not be bullied by a rogue landowner with a grudge. This lake belongs to all of us." Except it didn't. Not the part that mattered. Not the land under the sluice. Not the technical rights of way. Not the engineering. All of that was mine. The press conference backfired almost immediately. Social media picked it up. One local blogger posted side-by-side images of the lagoon before and after. Caption, "Karen drained the fun." Then the real break came. Brandon, the county clerk I'd spoken to weeks ago, called me. "You're going to want to see this," he said. He forwarded me a document, a fake authorization form submitted by Silver Hollow HOA weeks before the bridge demolition. It was signed by a man listed as a county landscape inspector. Only problem? That guy had retired 2 years ago. His signature was a forgery. Worse yet, the person who filed it electronically, Karen Lance. I forwarded it to Denise, who immediately added forgery of government documents and misrepresentation of authority to the criminal complaint. Now we were playing with real fire. The sheriff's office requested a formal interview with Karen. She refused. The county attorney issued a subpoena. The walls were closing in, and Karen knew it. But she wasn't the type to go quietly. The next morning, I found a letter taped to my front gate. It was handwritten, no envelope. "You think you've won, but this isn't over. Some of us still believe in what's right." I read it 3 times, then dropped it into a Ziploc bag for evidence. Karen was unraveling, and I was just getting started. I didn't sleep much that week. Not because of stress, I'd long since passed the point of caring about HOA tantrums, but because I was drafting schematics. I had an idea, and ideas are dangerous when you've got time, tools, and nothing left to lose. While Denise prepared for the criminal hearing, I took a field trip. Not to court, not to the press, to my garage. I dusted off a set of blueprints labeled Lake Flow Optimization Concept 2012, unfunded. It was an old project proposal I'd never acted on, a passive redirection system that would regulate excess water from the smaller cove and route it through. A bypass channel away from the main lagoon. Back then, there hadn't been a need. Now it was practically poetic. I submitted a simple notification to the county. Temporary flow testing of existing infrastructure. No new construction, no environmental disruption. I made sure it passed every permit checkbox they had. Didn't need their approval, just needed to not trip any red flags. They acknowledged the notice and thanked me for being proactively transparent. That same afternoon, I got a call from a resident of Silver Hollow, a woman named Mary Travers. She wasn't on the board, but her house backed up to the drained lagoon. "I just wanted to say," she began awkwardly, "that I don't agree with what Karen's done, and a lot of us, well, we didn't know she'd faked anything." I waited. There's a group of homeowners talking about disbanding the HOA, or at least removing her, but we're scared she'll retaliate. She's vindictive. She threatened to sue me last year for repainting my door. I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "If she contacts you again, save every message. Don't respond, just forward them to my lawyer." That night, someone tried to access my trail cam. They covered it with duct tape. Not destroyed, just blinded. That was a mistake. By morning, I'd replaced the camera and mounted 2 more. Then I left a gift, a sign nailed to a tree visible from the path. Trespassers will be recorded, reported, and publicly embarrassed. The next morning, a sheriff's deputy stopped by. Different one this time. Young guy, looked nervous. Ms. Lance filed a harassment report against you, he said, almost apologetically. Harassment? I laughed. I haven't spoken to her in 2 weeks. She claims the camera system and signage constitute intimidation. Let me get this straight. After she destroyed my bridge, tried to sue me for draining water that left on its own, and forged county documents. She's feeling threatened by a tree sign. He didn't answer, just muttered, "We have to file it," and left. Denise sent a letter to the sheriff's office that afternoon. In it, she cited harassment statutes, case precedent, and concluded, "Our client is within his rights to monitor access to his own land, particularly after criminal trespass and property damage. If Silver Hollow HOA continues to misuse public complaint channels to interfere with lawful activity, we will seek injunctive relief." 2 days later, Karen did the stupidest thing yet. She held a community town watch meeting and announced the formation of the Silver Hollow Lake Preservation Committee, claiming it would re-establish stewardship over the lake and adjacent lands. Then she made the claim publicly, on record, that the sluice gate itself was illegally constructed and subject to removal. She said, "We intend to take control of the system. It's time we reclaim what's ours." Except it wasn't hers. It was mine. Every bolt, pipe, and anchor of that system was legally installed, maintained, and documented. Her little power grab was about to cost her more than she could imagine. I forwarded the video to the county prosecutor. 24 hours later, the DA filed an amended charge, conspiracy to commit infrastructure interference. The noose was tightening. The courtroom smelled like old carpet and government-grade coffee. I sat at the plaintiff's table in my one decent blazer, the same one I wore to my retirement ceremony. Denise sat beside me, flipping calmly through a stack of evidence folders thick enough to stun a bear. Across from us sat Karen Lance, flanked by 2 lawyers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. She wore a navy blue suit, not a hair out of place, but she looked thinner, tense. Her hands shook when she took notes. Gone was the smug HOA president who smiled as my bridge sank into the lake. In her place was a woman cornered, exhausted, and circling the legal drain. The judge was a no-nonsense type, federal boots still dusty, rural Montana stock. He didn't like long speeches. He liked facts, and we had a lot of them. Denise opened with video footage from the night of the bridge demolition, grainy but unmistakable. The hired crew in hoodies and gloves working by floodlight, torching through steel supports. Then came the forged document, the fake authorization with a retired inspector's name and signature. The clerk from the county took the stand and confirmed it was false. Karen's lawyer tried to claim she'd been misinformed by a subordinate. That fell apart when we introduced the digital forensics, showing the document had been submitted from her personal HOA-issued laptop. Then came the easement records. A thick binder of county filings, signed agreements, and blueprints showing the sluice gate, the drainage system, and the land boundaries. All legally mine. Denise walked the court through it like a surgeon. She made it simple, brutal, and crystal clear. Karen Lance had no authority, no jurisdiction, and no legal leg to stand on. Their side tried a last-ditch defense that I had weaponized water to damage Silver Hollow property. Denise countered with engineering logs, photos, timestamps, maintenance reports, and county statements verifying zero manipulation. The system had functioned exactly as designed, and the only damage came from years of HOA negligence and sediment mismanagement. But the final nail came from someone I didn't expect. Mary Travers took the stand. She testified, under oath, that Karen had pressured board members into silence, threatened residents with lawsuits, and pushed through demolition of the bridge without a vote. She said Karen referred to me as a squatter with a shack and a fantasy of relevance. The court went dead silent at that. Then Mary held up her phone and played a voicemail, Karen's voice unmistakable, saying, "If he won't play nice, we'll take it by force. The lake is ours now." That was it. The judge recessed for 20 minutes. When he came back, he didn't waste time. He found in our favor, on every count. Karen Lance was found guilty of trespassing, destruction of private property, forgery of a public document, and conspiracy to interfere with protected infrastructure. The sentence, 6 years in state prison, a personal fine of $300,000, and a lifetime ban from holding any administrative position in any HOA, board, or public oversight role. Silver Hollow HOA was dissolved by court order due to gross misconduct and misuse of power. All HOA-owned property, the clubhouse, equipment, communal facilities, was seized by the county. Their bank account was frozen. Their land was rezoned under county oversight. And me, I was awarded $4.2 million in damages, punitive compensation, and lost business revenue. More importantly, I was granted exclusive, uncontestable rights to the sluice gate system and hydrological oversight of the entire lake region. No more cooperative stewardship. No more HOA interference. It was mine, legally, officially, permanently. Karen didn't look at me when they took her away. She just stared straight ahead, like the whole courtroom was fog. But I saw the moment it hit her, when the cuffs clicked and the illusion shattered. I walked out into the Montana air feeling 10 pounds lighter. I spent the next few weeks doing something I hadn't done in years, walking my land without looking over my shoulder. The county sent out surveyors to reconfirm boundaries. Turns out the HOA had encroached on nearly an acre of my property with their community trail system, that entire gravel path cutting through the pines. Mine. It was promptly closed and the signage removed by court order. I got a personal letter from the county commissioner thanking me for preserving the integrity of regional water systems and offering me a permanent advisory position for future hydrological infrastructure projects. I declined the desk job but agreed to consult, on my terms, from my porch, with whiskey in hand. The press kept buzzing for a while. Articles ran with headlines like, "Veteran Defends Land Takes Down Rogue HOA," "The Bridge They Shouldn't Have Burned," and "From Engineer to Executioner, One Man versus HOA Overreach." A production company even reached out about turning the story into a docuseries. I told them I'd only do it if I got final cut and they didn't water it down with dramatic music and fake tears. Karen, meanwhile, was transferred to a state correctional facility just outside Helena. Word got around that she wasn't taking prison life well. Apparently, micromanaging the chow line didn't go over so great with the guards. Silver Hollow, a ghost of its former self. Without HOA funding, the landscaping died first. Then the security patrols stopped. By the end of the month, several houses went on the market at fire sale prices. A few former board members tried to rally a replacement organization, but the county shut them down faster than you can say violation of injunction. Some of them reached out to me, not to apologize, of course, but to ask for reconciliation, mutual benefit, and in one case, a modest partnership in future stewardship. One even had the nerve to suggest a shared maintenance fund. I sent them all the same reply, no. But there was one letter I responded to. Mary Travers sent a handwritten note. No fancy stationery, no demands. Just thanks. She'd sold her house, moved to Missoula, and donated part of the proceeds to a legal defense fund for homeowners battling abusive HOAs. She included a small wood carving of a bridge. Nothing fancy, just a simple arc over a carved lake. It now sits on my mantle next to the original blueprint for the one they destroyed. As for my land, I finally rebuilt, not just the bridge, but everything else I'd been putting off. A new barn, a reinforced access trail, and solar panels along the ridge. I put up a new weatherproof gate with an automatic lock, ran fiber optics from the main road, and built a second shed strictly for secure storage. This time, I didn't just prepare for sabotage, I engineered for siege. And of course, I rebuilt the bridge. Wider, stronger, steel reinforced with a timber finish that blended into the natural line of the lake. Took me 3 weeks, 2 buddies from the old corps, and enough coffee to wake a hibernating moose. When it was done, I stood in the middle and watched the reflection of the sky on the water. No interruptions. No HOA minions measuring shoreline curvature. Just me, the land, and silence. Spring came late that year. The snow melted slow, reluctant, bleeding into the lake like an old wound healing on its own terms. By April, the water had returned, not to the lagoon, not to the spa decks or abandoned docks of Silver Hollow, but to my cove, steady and full, just as it was meant to be. The ecosystem bounced back faster than anyone expected. Mallards nested under the willow near the bridge. Trout returned to the deep pocket below the spillway. A bald eagle made regular rounds over the tree line, and every time I stepped onto the bridge, I felt it. The land breathing again, free of parasites and polo shirts and self-appointed governance. I'd posted one final sign at the foot of the bridge. engraved in weathered bronze, bolted into the timber. Only those who don't trespass may cross this bridge. It became something of a legend among the locals. Hikers would take photos. Passers-by would leave little stones or coins at its base, like it was some kind of shrine to property rights. I didn't mind. Let them find meaning where they could. I already had mine. The phone stopped ringing, eventually. The lawsuits dried up. Even the reporters moved on. Karen filed for an appeal, lost it, and vanished from headlines entirely. Last I heard, she was managing inventory at a warehouse in Butte under her maiden name. No more lake views. No more power. Denise went on to win 3 more major cases against HOAs in other parts of Montana. She called me her lucky talisman. I told her I preferred blunt instrument of justice, but we compromised on consultant. She still sends me Christmas cards. Every year they feature a cartoon HOA building on fire. I rebuilt the cabin porch last month, sanded it down, sealed the boards, and added a swinging bench I'd been putting off for years. From there, I can see everything. The bridge, the water line, the edge of the distant lagoon where Karen's empire once stood. Sometimes I still get visitors. A young couple thinking of buying land nearby. A journalist researching property rights. A law student writing a thesis on HOA overreach. They all ask the same thing. What made you fight it so hard? And I always give them the same answer. This land's mine, not because I stole it, or inherited it, or claimed it with a flag. It's mine because I bought it, I worked it, I respected it. And when someone came to take it with a form letter and a bulldozer, I fought back. Not out of anger, out of principle. Then I point toward the lake, calm and blue. And that's what principle gets you. They usually leave quiet, thoughtful. Some of them smile. One kid cried. I didn't build this place for them, but I don't mind showing it to those who understand. And when the sun sets just right over the ridge, casting gold across the timber, I walk the bridge once more, slow, steady, and listen to the boards creak beneath my boots. Not with fear, with peace.